The call came on a Thursday afternoon in late June from a number with a Costa Rica country code, which I recognized because I had been tracking the international charges on my credit card statement for the past 8 days, and had developed a familiarity with the prefix that I had not previously possessed. I was in the garage of my house on Walnut Street in Springfield, Missouri, changing the oil on my truck. I had the truck on ramps and a drain pan under the crankcase, and the particular focused quiet of a man doing a routine task that does not require active thought, which had become one of my preferred states since Vera died. Routine tasks, hands occupied, mind available for whatever it needed to work through, without being directed at anything specific. The phone showed my son's name. I set down the wrench. I answered. He said, "Hey, Dad." He said it with the specific lightness of a person on vacation, the slightly elevated energy of someone who has been in 78-degree weather, with room service for 8 days, and whose concerns have been successfully narrowed to what they want for dinner. I said, "Hey, back." He said, "So Brianna and I have been talking. We love it down here. The resort is incredible, everything's been perfect, and we were thinking, what if we extended a few more days, just through Sunday? The room's available, I already checked." I said nothing. He said, "Your card's still linked to the room, right? It would just be the extra 3 nights, probably another 1,200 or so. Not a big deal." "Your card is still linked to the room, right?" "Not. Would you be willing to cover a few more nights?" "Not. I'll pay you back, I promise." "Not even, is that okay with you?" A statement with a question mark at the end. An assumption dressed as a question. A man on his honeymoon in Costa Rica, calling his father to confirm that the vehicle he was riding in was still fueled and available, the way you call to confirm a reservation you made without asking. I said nothing for a moment, long enough that the silence had its own specific weight. Then I said, "I hope you two are having a wonderful time." I ended the call. I sat in my garage with the truck on the ramps and the drain pan under the crankcase and the wrench in my lap, and I looked at the wall above my workbench where I had hung a photograph of Vera and me from our 35th anniversary, the two of us on the back porch with the garden behind us in August, and I thought about what she would have said about this moment if she had been standing in the garage with me. She would not have said much. That was not her way. She would have looked at me with the specific patient expression she used when I already knew the answer to a question I was still working up to asking myself, and she would have waited for me to get there. I was already there. I picked up my phone, and I called the resort in Costa Rica. I asked for the reservations desk. I told them I was the card holder on file for the room registered to Mason Hutchins, and that I needed to remove my payment method from the reservation, effective immediately. The woman on the phone was professional and efficient, and asked me to confirm the last 4 digits of the card and the billing zip code, which I did. She told me the card had been removed, and asked if I would like to provide an alternate payment method for the remaining nights of the original reservation. I said the guests would need to provide their own payment at checkout. She said she would note the reservation accordingly. I thanked her. I set the phone down. I finished the oil change. I cleaned up the garage. I made dinner. I watched the news. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and I slept without difficulty, which is the thing that happens when you have made a decision you should have made a long time ago and have finally made it. At 7:14 the next morning, my phone rang. The same Costa Rica country code, but a different number. Brianna's cell. She was not using the lightness of vacation voice. She was using the voice of someone who had been at a hotel checkout desk for approximately 30 minutes and had exhausted the options that did not involve calling the father-in-law. She said some things. They were specific, and they were loud, and they contained several observations about what kind of person I was, and what I had done, and what I needed to understand about how families worked. I let her finish. Then I said, "Good morning, Brianna. I hope the rest of the trip was lovely." She said more things. I said, "Mason has my number. Have him call me when he's ready to talk." I ended that call too. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table on Walnut Street in Springfield, Missouri, and I looked at the morning light coming through the east window, and I thought about the ledger in the second drawer of my desk in the study, which I had been keeping for 3 years, and which I had updated for the last time the evening before the wedding. And I thought about what the next few days were going to look like, and I thought about Vera. I thought about what she would have done, and then I thought about what I was going to do, which was the same thing she would have done, just several years later, and at a much higher cost. My name is Earl Hutchins. I am 68 years old. I live in Springfield, Missouri, and what happened in that hotel in Costa Rica was not the beginning of the story. It was the end of a very long middle section, and the beginning of something that was overdue. Welcome to True Story. Before we get into all of it, if this situation sounds even slightly familiar, if there is a version of this inside your own family that you have been watching build for longer than it should have been allowed to build, I want you to know about Ironclad. It's a 75-page system built for exactly this. The Legacy Shield inside Ironclad walks you through the exact process of documenting your assets and your intentions so clearly that nobody can dispute them. Not in court, not in a family argument, not at a hotel checkout desk in Costa Rica. The Toxler Relative Boundary Blueprint gives you word-for-word scripts for the conversations you need to have with the person who has been treating your generosity as a permanent line of credit. Scripts that are direct without being cruel, and that create a record of what was said and when. The Family Protection Vault covers every legal document your family needs before a crisis forces the issue. Power of attorney, signature protection, the paperwork that keeps what you built where you put it. And Raised Right is the system for making sure the next generation understands that money is not a given, and that what's been built has to be earned to be kept. 75 pages. 3 fillable templates. $8.99 today, half off the regular price, and the link and QR code are both on screen right now. Now let's go back to the beginning. I built Hutchins General Contracting in Springfield, Missouri in 1986, starting with a pickup truck, a wheelbarrow, and a commercial license I had earned by working for a concrete contractor in Nixa for 7 years, before I understood enough about every aspect of the business to run one. I started with residential foundations and small commercial slabs, and built into general contracting over the first decade, taking on full build projects as the reputation developed, and the crew grew, and the bonding capacity increased. By the time I retired in 2019 at 62, Hutchins General had completed over 300 residential and commercial projects in Greene and Christian counties. We had at our peak 21 full-time employees and a subcontractor network that I had built over 30 years by paying on time and being straight about what we needed and giving credit to the people who earned it. I sold the business to my operations manager, a 40-year-old man named Dale Pruitt, who had been with me for 14 years and who had earned the right to own it, at a price that was fair to both of us. The sale gave me a retirement that was comfortable, without being extravagant, which is the correct description of what I had always wanted, and what Vera had always wanted alongside me. Vera Mae Hutchins, born Vera Mae Corbett in Bolivar, Missouri, in 1954, was my wife for 40 years, and the person I had organized my entire adult life around, from the Tuesday afternoon in 1979, when I had met her at a church picnic in the pavilion behind First Baptist, and she had handed me a paper plate of potato salad and said something about the weather that was so precisely accurate and so concisely stated that I had stopped moving and just stood there looking at her until it became obvious I had stopped moving, at which point she had said, "You're going to drop that plate." She was a bookkeeper. She kept books for 4 small businesses in Springfield for 22 years, working from home after our children were born, and she brought to that work the same quality she brought to everything, which was a complete intolerance for imprecision. Numbers were what they were. The column either balanced or it did not. You did not approximate in her work. You found the error and you corrected it, and you did not move forward until the correction was documented. She kept the family books with the same rigor. Not obsessively, not in a way that made money the center of the household's emotional life, but with the specific steady maintenance of someone who understood that the difference between knowing and not knowing your financial position was the difference between choosing your future and having it chosen for you. Every year she produced a 1-page summary of where we were, what we had, and what the trend line was looking like. She showed it to me every January over coffee at the kitchen table, and we talked about it for an hour, and then she filed it, and we went on with the year. What I did not know until I sat with her books after she died was that she had been maintaining a separate column, a column I had not been shown at the January coffee table meetings, a column that dated back to 2001, and that recorded, in her precise handwriting, every dollar that had moved from our household to Mason's situations over 22 years. She had not hidden it from me. It was in the books, clearly labeled, accessible. She had simply never directed my attention to it, because directing my attention to it would have required a conversation that she had decided, for reasons I have spent 3 years trying to understand, was not the right conversation for us to have while she was alive. I think she did not want me to have to choose between the number and my son while she was there to manage the situation in the middle. I think she understood that her presence was a buffer, a translator, a way of keeping both things true at the same time. I think she believed, with the patience that was her most characteristic quality, that Mason would find his way to a different place eventually, and that her job was to keep the books accurately, so that when eventually arrived, I would have the complete picture, rather than the edited one. Eventually arrived in June of 2023, 8 days into a Costa Rica honeymoon, with a question about whether my card was still linked. She died of a cardiac event in April of 2020. Quickly, as those things go, which is the mercy in it, and I have already said what I need to say about that kind of loss and its residency in a house, and I will not repeat it here, except to say that what she left me, in addition to the photograph on the garage wall, was the books. The complete, precise, unambiguous books of the family's financial life, maintained in her handwriting up to the week she died, and a column in those books that told me everything I needed to know about the situation I had been inside for 22 years. Those books were where I found the full picture of Mason. I had 2 children. Nora was 33, lived in Kansas City where she worked in hospital administration, called on Tuesday and Thursday evenings without variation, came home for the holidays, and for no particular reason, when she felt like it, and did not require a reason. She had her mother's precision and her mother's economy of language. She had also, over the preceding several years, said to me, in various careful framings, that she was worried about how much I was carrying for Mason, and that she thought I should think about whether the carrying was serving him or just making it possible for him not to serve himself. I had heard her. I had been slower to act on it than she deserved. Mason was 36. He worked in what he described as marketing consulting, which had been the description since 2014, and which had never produced a W-2 that indicated the consulting was producing meaningful income. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Springfield that I had been supplementing the rent on since 2018, $250 a month, consistently, which over 5 years was $15,000. He drove a truck I had purchased for him in 2019 as what I had told myself was a one-time meaningful gift, and what had become the vehicle that sat in the parking lot of his apartment while I paid a portion of the lot fee. He was engaging and funny and had his mother's smile and the ability to make you feel, in his company, that everything was fine and that the numbers were a detail that would work themselves out. The numbers were not a detail, and they were not working themselves out. Mason had borrowed money from us for the first time in 2007, when he was 20, and had a car repair bill he could not cover. That loan was $2,000, and he had repaid it within 4 months, which established, in my mind, a precedent for how these arrangements worked. The precedent was wrong. The 2007 loan was the only one that had ever been repaid in full, and on the timeline he stated, every subsequent arrangement had been partial or deferred, or quietly reclassified, by the passage of time, from a loan into something else. In 2011, he had borrowed $6,000 for what he described as a business investment in a landscaping operation that a friend of his was starting. The landscaping operation had not started. The $6,000 had gone somewhere that Mason was vague about when I asked, which I had asked once, and then had not asked again, because the asking produced a specific kind of discomfort in him that I had not wanted to produce. In 2014, he had borrowed $9,000 for a down payment on an apartment he was moving into with a girlfriend. A move that made sense at the time, and that became 14 months later, when the girlfriend was gone, and Mason was asking about the rent supplement, a down payment on an arrangement rather than a transitional expense. In 2017, he had borrowed $12,000 for what he had described as a career pivot investment, a certification program in digital marketing that he had completed, and that had not produced the pivot it was supposed to produce, but that had produced, approximately 8 months later, the marketing consulting description that had been his professional identity ever since. I was not tracking all of this with the precision Vera was tracking it. I was tracking it the way fathers track things about their children, which is with a combination of memory and hope and the consistent willingness to believe that the next thing will be the thing that changes the trajectory. That is not a flaw. That is what parents do. The flaw is in letting it continue past the point where the evidence has made the trajectory clear, and the belief has stopped being hope and started being something closer to denial. Vera's books made the trajectory clear. $112,000 over 22 years made the trajectory clear. I had sat with that number in the spring of 2020, and I had opened the new notebook, and I had made the decision that I was going to keep my own column going forward, and that the column was going to be the full record, and that when the full record reached the point where doing nothing about it was no longer a position a reasonable man could hold, I was going to do something about it. That point arrived at a hotel checkout desk in Costa Rica. Vera's books showed me the full 22-year history of what we had given Mason, not in a single lump sum, but in the accumulated weight of small and medium amounts over 2 decades that individually were easy to absorb and collectively added up to something that I had been too close to see clearly until I sat down with the books 6 months after she died and laid the legal pad out and added the column. The column came to $112,000. Over 22 years. Every loan that had never been repaid, every supplement, every one-time meaningful gift, every contribution to a situation that Mason had described as temporary. $112,000 in Vera's handwriting, column after column of dates and amounts and what the money had been for. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I got a notebook and I started a new column, not to track what was past, which was past and could not be changed, to track what came after. What came after Vera died, and Mason became the person who called with the new versions of the temporary situations. What came after the temporary situations included, in order, 3 months of full rent when the consulting was slow, a car repair bill in the fall that he had asked me to put on my card and that he had not repaid, a personal loan of $8,000 for what he described as a business opportunity that had not produced anything visible, and then the wedding. The wedding. Mason and Brianna got engaged in October of 2022. Brianna was 34, worked in event planning, and had a personality that I would describe as organized in the way that events are organized, which is to say, things were arranged for a specific effect, and the effect was the point. She had been pleasant to me in the particular way that a person is pleasant to someone whose resources they have assessed and found useful. I had noted this assessment the first time we met, and had filed it, and had watched over the following 2 years to see what she did with it. What she did with it was plan a wedding. The wedding budget, as presented to me at a dinner at Mason's apartment in March of 2023, was $52,000. The venue alone was $19,000. The catering was $11,000. The photography, the florals, the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon, all itemized on a spreadsheet Brianna had printed and placed in front of me at my seat at the table, with the precision of someone who has thought carefully about presentation. I had looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. The line items were specific. The photographer was a particular photographer who had a specific style that Brianna described with a fluency that told me she had been researching this for longer than the engagement. The venue was a property south of Springfield, with an outdoor ceremony space and an indoor reception hall that accommodated 220 guests. The florals were from a designer in Kansas City, which required a travel fee. Each line was specific, and each line added to the one before it the way a well-constructed invoice adds, which is to say it arrived at a total that felt inevitable rather than excessive because each individual item had been justified before you reached it. What the spreadsheet did not contain was a line for Mason and Brianna's contribution. I looked for it. It was not there. The column to the right of the line items, which was labeled Source, showed my name beside most entries, and Robert's parents beside the rehearsal dinner, and a blank beside several of the smaller items. Mason had said, "We were hoping you could cover most of it, Dad. Robert's parents are contributing 10 from their side. We can put a few things on the card, but the bulk of it is going to need to come from you." The bulk of it. I had said I would think about it, and I had gone home and opened the notebook, and I had written down the date and the figure, and I had thought about Vera. I had thought about the January coffee table meetings, and the one-page summaries, and what she would have said about a spreadsheet with a source column that did not list the people whose wedding it was. What she would have said was, "Earl, that spreadsheet tells you everything you need to know, not about the wedding, about what comes after it." She would have been right. She was always right about these things, and she would have been right about this one. I contributed $34,000 to the wedding. I made that decision with full awareness, and with the specific clarity of a man who has decided that this is the line, and that what is on the other side of it is going to be different. I wrote the check. I handed it to Mason at a breakfast 3 weeks before the wedding, and I said, "This is a gift. Gifts are complete. This one is." He said he understood. I believe he heard the words. I am less certain he understood what they were pointing toward. The wedding was in May. It was beautiful, in the way that $52,000 produces beauty, which is thoroughly and without visible seams. Brianna was a capable event planner, and she had planned this event with the full force of that capability applied to her own wedding, which produced a result that the guests found impressive and that I found expensive, and that Nora, standing beside me during the reception, found quietly and specifically telling. She leaned over and said, "The honeymoon is in Costa Rica." I said I knew. She said, "Did you book it?" I said I had not booked it. I had been told that the flights had been booked on my card and that I would be reimbursed, which I had absorbed, without fully processing what it meant that I was being informed of the charge, rather than asked about the charge. Nora said, "Dad." I said, "I know." She said nothing else. She understood, as she always understood things, exactly what I meant by "I know," and exactly how long it had taken me to get there. The honeymoon flights, I discovered when I checked the statement 2 days after the wedding, had been booked at $4,200, business class, which I also had not been told, and which represented a choice that someone makes when they believe the person holding the card is not going to check the details, or is not going to say anything about the details if they do check. I was checking, and I was going to say something. The question was when and in what form. The form announced itself 8 days into the honeymoon at a Costa Rica resort, where the room, which I had been told was a standard room with a garden view, turned out to be a suite at a rate of $640 per night, when my son called to tell me the trip was going so well that they were thinking of extending through Sunday, and to confirm that my card was still linked. "Your card is still linked to the room, right?" The question was, when and in what form? The form was a phone call to the reservations desk, and a removed payment method, and a checkout the following morning. Mason landed at Springfield Branson National Airport on Saturday evening. I know this because Nora called me from Kansas City to tell me he had called her from the plane, which was the order of operations that made sense given that he had called me from the hotel checkout, and I had said what I said, and ended the call, and the next available family member had been his sister. Nora said he was upset. She said Brianna was extremely upset. She said they had been required to pay for the additional nights they had stayed after Thursday on their own credit card, which had handled 2 of the 3 nights before reaching its limit, and that the final night had been covered by a credit card in Brianna's mother's name, reached by phone from the Costa Rica resort's lobby. She said, "He wants to come over tonight." I said, "Tomorrow is fine. Tell him tomorrow afternoon." She said, Are you okay? I said, I'm clear. That's what I am right now. She said, Mom would be proud of you for doing this. She'd also say you should have done it sooner. I said, I know that too. He came on Sunday at 2 in the afternoon. He came alone, which told me that either Brianna was too upset to come, or he had decided to do this part without her, and I thought the latter was more likely, and was the right call, whatever his reasons for making it. He looked the way a 36-year-old man looks when he has spent 3 days in a Costa Rica hotel, working out how he is going to have a conversation he has not had before, and has arrived at the conversation still not fully certain how to have it. He looked younger than 36 in the specific way that people look young when they are about to learn something they should have learned earlier. I had the ledger on the kitchen table, not confrontationally positioned. Just there, the notebook with the new column, sitting beside my coffee mug in the ordinary way that things sit on kitchen tables when they are part of the room, rather than being produced for effect. He sat down across from me. He looked at the notebook. He looked at me. He said, What is that? I said it was a record I had been keeping since his mother died. I said it was a column of dates and amounts and what the money had been for. I said it started in May of 2020 and ended with the entry I had made the Thursday evening I called the hotel in Costa Rica and removed my card from the reservation. He said, Dad. His voice had the specific quality of a person beginning a sentence they do not know how to finish. I said, I'm not going to read it to you. It's there if you want to look at it. What I want to tell you is what it adds up to, and what I've decided. He did not reach for the notebook. He looked at the table. I said, Since your mother died, not counting the wedding, I have given or lent you $41,300 over 4 years. That number does not include the 22 years before that, which is in your mother's books, and which I have also read. It is just the 4 years since April of 2020. It includes the flights to Costa Rica, which were booked on my card without my prior agreement, and at a class of service I was not told about, and it includes the 8 nights of the original reservation at the resort at $640 per night, which was also not what I had understood when I was told there would be flights and a room. He said, the suite was Brianna's idea. She found an upgrade deal, and she thought. I said, Mason, I'm not asking you to account for each item. I'm telling you what the column adds up to, and what I've decided. The items are not the issue. The pattern is the issue. He was quiet. He pulled his coffee cup toward him and held it with both hands, but did not drink from it. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard was doing its ordinary July thing. The garden Vera had planted producing its midsummer fullness in the way it always did, reliable and specific, and completely indifferent to what was happening inside the house. I said, Your mother kept books for 22 years on this family. She kept a column I had not seen until she was gone. That column, from 2001 to 2020, came to $112,000. She did not hide it from me. She simply did not direct my attention to it. I have spent 3 years thinking about why she didn't. He looked up. I said, I think she believed you would find your way to a different place. She was a patient person, and she was a believing person, and she gave people enormous room to become what they needed to become. That was a quality I loved in her. It is also the quality that allowed a column to run for 22 years and reach $112,000 before anyone said the number out loud. He said, Mom never said anything to me. I said, No, she didn't. That was her choice, and I'm not criticizing it. I'm explaining the context for my choice, which is different. My choice is that the column ends, not because I am angry, and not because I don't love you, and not because I want you to fail. My choice is that a man of 68 years with a specific retirement that he built carefully over 40 years cannot continue to treat that retirement as a resource for situations he was not told about and was not asked about. The card thing in Costa Rica was not the cause. It was the confirmation. It confirmed that the arrangement had become an assumption, and I am not willing to be an assumption. Mason was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the kitchen settled into the particular silence of a room where something important has been said, and is sitting in the air. He said, "I've always known you'd cover things. I didn't think about it as an assumption. I thought about it as family." I said, "Family is a relationship. What we've had around money is an arrangement. Those are different things, and I should have been clearer about the difference a long time ago. That's my part in this. I am being clear about it now." Quick pause, because I know that if you're watching this, part of you is counting the number in that ledger and thinking about your own version of it. The amount you've given that was never asked for, just expected. The arrangement that started as temporary and never ended. If that's where you are right now, Ironclad's Toxwell Relative Boundary Blueprint is the section built for exactly this moment. Not after the crisis, but before the next ask comes. It gives you the word-for-word scripts for the conversation, where you establish what changes and why, the documentation process that creates a record of what was agreed going forward, and the specific language that closes the open accounts without closing the relationship permanently. The Legacy Shield makes sure what you've built is protected before someone's assumption about it becomes their plan, and the Family Protection Vault covers the paperwork that means nobody can access what you haven't authorized them to access. Ever. 75 pages. $8.99 today. Half off. Link and QR code are both on screen. This is the one to get before the next call comes. Now let me finish this. He said, "I know I've taken more than I should have." It was the first honest sentence he had said to me in this conversation, and possibly in several years, and it had the specific quality of something that has been held for a long time being set down. Not full confession, not complete accounting, but honest in the way that first steps are honest, which is that they are the real thing even if they are only the beginning. I said, "I know you know. I think you've known for a while. I think your mother knew, and I think she was hoping it would find its way to a different place on its own, and I think it did not find its way there." He said, "She never said anything to me about it." I said, "Your mother gave people the space to become who they needed to become. She was patient about it and she was generous about it. I've been the same way. We both were. What I'm telling you now is that I've run out of patience in the specific way that has nothing to do with anger. It has to do with arithmetic." He looked up from the table. I said, "The arithmetic is this. I am 68 years old. The retirement I have is the retirement I have. I built it carefully over 40 years, and I am not in a position to continue treating it as a resource for situations I was never fully told about. The card is removed from the hotel. The monthly supplement to the rent ends at the end of July, which gives you 60 days. The truck note that's in my name needs to be refinanced in your name or sold within 90 days. These are not punishments. They are the correct accounting of a situation that has been incorrectly accounted for a long time." He said, "What about the wedding?" I said, "The wedding was a gift. Gifts are not repaid, but they are also not repeated at that scale, and I want you to understand that clearly going forward." He said, "Brianna is not happy with you right now." I said, "I know. She can take the time she needs. My door is not closed to either of you, but the account is." He sat for a while longer. We talked about some other things, the way people talk around the edges of a large thing after the large thing has been said. I poured him a cup of coffee and he took it, and we sat at the table together in the kitchen, where he had grown up eating breakfast and doing homework, and where Vera had kept her books at the corner desk that was still there, still her desk, still with her handwriting visible on the notepad she had left beside the calculator. He asked about the notepad once, a couple years after she died. I had told him she had left it mid-calculation, and I had not wanted to erase what she was working on. He had looked at it for a moment and not said anything, which was the right response. Before he left, he said, "I'm sorry about Costa Rica, Dad. The card thing, I shouldn't have called it that way." I said, "No, you shouldn't have." He said, "I think I've been calling it that way for a long time without saying it out loud." I said, "I think that's right." He left. I watched his truck, my truck, technically, until the refinancing went through, pull out of the driveway and turn onto Walnut Street and disappear in the direction of his apartment. I stood in the doorway for a moment, and then I went back to the kitchen, and I closed the notebook, and I put it in the second drawer of the desk in the study. and I made myself dinner. Nora called at 7. She said, "How'd it go?" I said it had gone the way it needed to go. She said, "Did he understand?" I said, "He understood enough. The rest will take time." She said, "Mom would have said that's the most you can ask for in one afternoon." I said, "She would have had a more specific way of putting it." She said, "She would have said, Earl, you can only pour what's in the pitcher. You let the boy refill his own." I said that was exactly what she would have said. The rent supplement ended in July, as I had said it would. The truck was refinanced in Mason's name in August, which required him to put it on a payment plan at a higher rate than I had been paying, which is the cost of the credit history that 7 years of not building your own credit produces. He managed it. He is managing it. Brianna called me in September. She was not screaming. She said she wanted to understand my perspective on what had happened, and I said I was happy to share it, and we talked for 40 minutes, and by the end of the 40 minutes, she understood it, and I understood something about her that I had not fully understood before, which is that a significant portion of what she had been doing in the first year of their marriage was operating on the information Mason had given her about how the family worked, and that information had been incomplete in ways that were Mason's responsibility rather than hers. I told her I did not hold the Costa Rica call against her. She had not made it. She had been in a hotel lobby working out how to pay a bill, and had called the number that seemed most likely to solve the problem. That was not a character flaw. That was problem solving. She said, "He told me you would cover the honeymoon." I said, "He told you that because he believed it. He believed it because I had always covered things. That's the part that was mine to change, and I changed it." She said, "I appreciate you telling me that directly." I said, "Your mother-in-law would have told you directly too. She was that kind of woman." There was a pause. Then Brianna said, "He talks about her, more than I expected." I said, "Good. She was worth talking about." Mason calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, because he is 36 years old, and building a life that has more in it than it used to. And Sundays are full in ways they were not, when calling his father was the path of least resistance. But most Sundays, Sundays where there is something to say, and where the something is not about money, which is a new category of Sunday call that I had not had in several years, and that I had forgotten how much I preferred. The ledger is in the second drawer. I have not added any entries to it since the one I made the Thursday evening I called the Costa Rica Hotel. The column is where it is, and it says what it says, and I do not look at it often. It did its job. It gave me the number and the clarity that the number produces when you see it all in one place, and stop managing your awareness of it in pieces. Vera kept that column for 22 years in the books she maintained for this family. She kept it precisely and without judgment, and she did not show it to me until she left it for me to find after she was gone, because she understood, as she understood most things about me, that I was not ready to see it while she was still managing it for us both. She left it the way she left everything important, clearly labeled, organized, and exactly where I could find it when I needed it. I needed it. I found it. I did what she left it there for me to do. 3 years later than ideal, and at considerably higher cost than the earlier version would have required. That is the arithmetic of patience, applied to something it should not have been applied to. The lesson is not that patience is wrong. The lesson is that a ledger exists whether you look at it or not, and the number in it does not stop growing while you are deciding whether you are ready to see it. I looked, I saw, I made the call. If this story hit close to home, if there is a ledger somewhere in your own life that you have been not looking at, an amount that has been accumulating while you told yourself it was temporary, don't wait for the Costa Rica call. Ironclad is the system that lets you handle this before the call comes, before the amount is what it is, before the conversation is harder than it needs to be. The Talks Little Boundary Blueprint gives you the exact words for the exact conversation. The Legacy Shield makes sure your retirement is yours and stays yours. The Family Protection Vault covers every document that protects what you built from the assumptions of the people around you. Raised Right is there for the next generation, so this pattern ends with this generation. 75 pages, 3 templates you can fill out tonight. $8.99 today, 50% off. Link and QR code are both on screen right now. Get it done. The ledger doesn't stop while you're thinking about it. And if this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one. True Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.